I wrote about this in my book that it really haunted me, and it haunted our family, that we missed the signs, whatever that means. I've since heard about all the quote unquote red flag behaviors, and
Yeah.
I've looked at all that stuff and was very dissatisfied, because a lot of those signs that you see, typically by the time you start seeing those things, it's way, way, way too late.
Yeah.
And so I was reading Matthew chapter 7, where Jesus says, I'll quote it, Matthew 7:15-20, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered by thorn bushes, or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits." I mean, Jesus is right that you can't produce good fruit when you have a bad heart. And so that kind of is the segue into the fruits. So okay. I think we'll begin with the first one, which is education. And so on the outside, and all abusers do this, they want to educate the child. They want to provide some form of education to them, whether it's teaching them about life skills, or teaching them a sport, or, whatever it is. Education in itself is a good thing. But when you dissect that, when you start listening to what the abuser is describing, a perpetrator describes a need to educate kids. Yeah. So this next fruit is images. Again, on the outside, creating an image for a child, or upholding the image of a child in itself is a good thing. Complimenting a child and telling them that, they look nice, even though it's creepy. It has a creep factor to it. But the perpetrator is obsessed with taking pictures of someone else's child. They're obsessed with these images. Next fruit is compliments. Again, in and of itself, that's a good thing. We ought to compliment children, and tell them how smart they are and how proud they make us. We all do it, and we should compliment kids. But what a wolf does, if you cut that fruit open and look at it, they'll make inappropriate comments about how cute or sexy or adorable a kid is. They'll talk about their hair, or stroke their hair, or offer to braid their hair, like just really over the top, inappropriate comments. Look for possessive language, like, "Look at my little sweetie," or "my best friend." Okay, the next one is personal time. Again, in and of itself, it's not bad to spend personal time with kids. Inappropriate context. But again, he shifts that to the need to spend time. I need to spend time with these kids. They need a father figure. They need somebody in their life to mentor them. And so he finds ways to isolate kids. And then he cloaks it in the need to spend personal time with his friends, his buddy, his best friend. Listen to how they describe these kids. It's not normal to talk about a 5-year-old kid as your best friend. So the next fruit is caring. Again, it's not a bad thing to care for children. But when you split that fruit open, it's the person who holds superiority to others in how much they care for children. And they talk about this obsessively. They'll brag about their level of care, how much time they spend together, how much they text. That ought to be a major red flag.
No.
Why parents allow their minor children to text with other adult men, or women for that matter, is beyond me. So the next fruit is love. And that's a big ticket one, right? Because it's the greatest and second greatest commandment. Well, an abuser will feel the need to showcase his love for children. In the public, watch for people who go out of their way to superficially make it look like they're just this wonderful family. Counseling. on the outside, right? It's not bad to provide some form of even informal counseling to kids or mentorship or something like that. But the wolf is going to see himself as the great comforter. You know, he's always the first to step up to counsel children. He studies psychology, especially child psychology. He rarely allows other adults to be part of counseling, you know, because you can't talk about the private things that the kids talk about and share, because they really open up to me. That's what an abuser is going to say that. Like, they just seem to really open up to me, and they share things that I'm not at liberty to talk about with other people. So the next one is moral policing. Again, in itself, not necessarily a bad thing. Like, I do it all the time, right? It's what we're doing right now. We're being, in a sense, moral police, and we're calling out bad behavior. And so how do you start to dissect this fruit? So the wolf is going to find ways to talk bad about others. And usually it's people who we're close to, like good friends of ours, people we look up to, people we respect. And it's also people who they would suspect would ever catch on to him, because he's got to discredit people. But the put downs are framed in a way that the wolf is, in this really subtle way, he's morally policing others. Accomplishments. They at the same time that he's tearing the character of others apart, he's building his own up by talking about all the kind things that he does for others, especially children. And though we would normally view this as arrogance, the wolf is able to come off as being humble, kind, benevolent, and this becomes his resume. This is the resume for the offender. So people view his past history with children, with all the accomplishments, and they begin to recommend him as a babysitter for their friends. And this one's really important because, like, I think about my dad. People wrote him letters of recommendation to babysit. Next one is protection. Now, this one, you want to talk about really messing with our heads, because protection of minors ought to be a priority.
Yeah.
Right? Again, that's what we're doing right here in this podcast. But the wolf describes this need to protect kids. They feel as if, again, they're the only ones qualified to do so. They talk about hating abuse, but they're never specific in how abuse brings harm to children. And that's part of the testing process too. They're seeing how people respond to that. Shelter. Again, on the outside, providing shelter for kids, pretty important thing. But what the wolf does is he describes his need to provide shelter. Flattery, smooth talk, pressure, manipulation, and then I put at the bottom of each of these persistence. The abuser is always persistent. They're not going to take no for an answer. Wow. And if you give them no as an answer, you're going to walk away feeling pretty bad about it. They just naturally have a way to make you feel guilty. If I walk away from any conversation and I feel guilty about anything, my brain is like, what's wrong with that person? Not what's wrong with me. Most people are like, what's wrong with me that I feel guilty? For me, I'm like, all right, what happened in this conversation that made me feel guilty? Because I don't normally walk away from conversations feeling guilty. All right, the next one is parenting. Again, maybe my wife and I are different, but we certainly don't feel the need or feel it's appropriate to parent other people's kids. And we certainly don't want other people to parent our kids. But the abuser feels this need to be a surrogate parent. He or she will become the parent that the child never had. Whether it's with your kids or somebody else's, he's going to step into that parenting role, and he won't give up. And that ought to be a sign to us. Like, if you say no, if it's a hard no, and they move on to somebody else's kid and automatically just step into that forceful parenting role, that ought to be a red flag. And then discipline. We mentioned discipline before. Again, in and of itself, not necessarily a bad thing. In inappropriate contexts, Like my wife works at a daycare, and if a kid is about to haul off and hit another kid, she's going to discipline. She's going to, and I'm not talking about corporal punishment.
Right.
I'm talking about like hey, like that's not okay. Discipline in and of itself is not a bad thing, but where the abuser differs is he feels his obligation to offer discipline to a kid. He's going to talk about lack of discipline that the kid has in his or her home. And a common phrase will be something like, Billy's a good kid, but, and they'll say something like, Johnny's rough around the edges, but boy, is he a quick learner. He responds so well when I talk to him. But I have to be firm. I have to use my firm voice. So in using discipline, the wolf is grooming the parent to allow him to counsel the child in private. This is all cyclical. All these fruits work together. The wolf insists on providing personal hygiene for children. He offers or even insists upon bathing kids. My dad did this. They insist upon bathing kids, administering personal hygiene products for the kids. For example, soap, deodorant, tampons, suntan lotion. In private, what they're doing is they're creating sexualized games. So watch out for the person who wants to provide hygiene. I had a conversation with a guy before that I had just met at, it was like a training for elders. And this guy was a song leader for the weekend. He was a school teacher for inner city kids. The way he talked about them was just, it was off. He was obsessing about them. Like, I just love these kids, and they just love all the things that we talked about. And I kid you not, in a personal conversation to me, he said, I have this one kid who I pick up who he's homeless at the time. And so I pick him up and bring him back to my place. And I even bathe him on the way to school. This is like a 14-year-old kid. It caught me so off guard at the time because that was like right after my dad was arrested. I was like in such shock that I didn't respond to it. And then he just kept going. He went on to another conversation. Like, he intentionally slipped that into the conversation. Now what I would do is I would say out loud enough that everybody else around could hear. I would say, wait, you bathe a 14-year-old boy on your way to school? What do you mean by that? And you'll see them squirm, and they'll be like, wait, I didn't say that. And I'll be like, no, you did say that. And I'll say it loud enough so that people around can hear, because that's what they're looking for. Like, they're testing you to see how this person's going to respond. Like, if I say something really over the top, bizarre, and inappropriate, is this person going to call me out on it? Or are they just going to, 99% of the time, we're going to be in such shock that we're just going to let it go, and we're not going to tell anybody else. And so I train people that when people say something highly inappropriate and over the top, repeat exactly what they said in their words, and repeat it loud enough so that other people can hear it, and ask them to clarify what they meant. The next fruit is food. A necessity, right? Something kids need. But what the wolf will do is he expresses the need to provide meals for kids. It's not just food. Like, he's going to cook. He's going to provide these meals for kids. He'll either take them out to eat, and it almost like when you take a step back now that we're describing it, you're like, wait, this looks like a date. And especially the way that he describes it. So he'll offer to cook with them, especially at the wolf's own place of residence in private. Food time almost always turns into some sort of inappropriate play or conversation, including food fights, body painting, consuming food off one another's bodies, drugging kids with flavored alcoholic drinks. We found that in Dad's apartment. So another fruit is play. The wolf likes to play games with the kids, especially games that involve physical contact of any kind. And that's because it seems innocent by the untrained eye. But for the wolf, he's building trust with the kids while literally groping them. Common games, spraying silly string, body paints, tattoos, watching movies together and cuddling on the couch, contact sports, piggyback rides, hide and seek, twister, any game that could be sexually suggestive. That's why this stuff isn't obvious unless you start asking questions of the kids. This adult wanted to play, like, get on all fours and like have kids whip each other. And that's an actual example. That happened at one of our Christian camps here in Pennsylvania. And what's interesting is it was never reported or investigated as a sexual crime. So yeah, watch for what type of play these abusers or people who we don't know are abusers are doing. Next fruit is transportation. The wolf offers rides to kids and almost always frames it as the child needs a ride. Again, look for this possessive language. He's too quick to create opportunities to transport kids. His MO is to do this alone. He'll use alone time in his car as an opportunity to grope the child, further groom, threaten, rape, or just plain offer companionship while transporting the child in his personal vehicle. The next one is favors. So the wolf manipulates both children and adults into doing favors for him. And usually by making the other person feel bad for him. It doesn't matter what the favor is, but somehow eventually they're going to find a way to ask you to do a favor for them. And what that accomplishes are these two things. One, an investment in the relationship because you want to help this person out. And two, it's automatically developing compassion or pity for the wolf. Both of these greatly reduce the likelihood of him being suspected of abuse because of the psychological impact that it has on both the child and the adult who've been groomed. The only time they're going to help you out or give you a favor is when it benefits them in some capacity. Last fruit is partnership. And so if emotional grooming is the negative side of psychological enslavement, team building is the positive. Wolf wants to create this way to build a sense of us for both children and adults. He volunteers to help with projects, ministries, anything where he can be painted as a dependable friend. That provides a positive public image, and he's providing favors to you or a service to you when it's convenient for him. And they'll test a child. They'll touch a child as they're talking to a parent because they have to test the parents too. And so they'll give a benign touch on the shoulder or whatever, like put their arm around a kid and pull them in for this tight hug as they're talking to the parents. And they're seeing like they're feeling is there resistance from the kid or the parents' eyes. Watching my hand, they'd start getting real handsy and their hand is all over the place, is constantly moving. Are the parents watching my hand or can I hold their spotlight of attention? So that's testing, and they'll test both victims and adults. And so like my specialty is abuse in plain sight. Got into studying abuse in plain sight because of things that my dad was saying about abusing his victims in front of their parents. I have a bunch of free videos, and then I have a training course that is very affordable. And that it's right now it's over 10 hours of content, and I'm going to continue to add to that. And so if you get that course, that's lifetime, and any future videos that I put will not add price to it. So it's like this expanding training because I want that stuff to be available,